Okay. And now back to all of you. Got it. Okay. Let's begin. Baruch atah Adonai.
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Torah. All right. So for the last few times that the class has been meeting, it's all been about Pesach. So I thought today, let's go back into the Torah portion. And normally this week's Torah portion would be a double Torah portion, Achrei Mot Kedoshim. Usually it's doubled. But this year, because we have an extra month of Adar, we have Achrei Mot alone. Achrei Mot focuses primarily on Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur way in which it was celebrated in the wilderness. And if you're interested, at my Shabbat morning contemplative circle, we are going to be speaking about Yom Kippur themes, particularly forgiveness. But today we're not going to be speaking about that. Today we're going to focus on the other piece of Achrei Mot, which literally means what? What does Achrei Mot mean?
After the death.
After the death. After the death of who?
Two sons.
Who's two sons?
Moshe, right?
Yeah, Aaron, exactly. Aaron's two sons. So we had a few weeks ago the Torah portion Shmini, which was the ordination ceremony of the priests. And it was in that parsha that Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, were killed by God. Then there's a break, and there's two Torah portions, Tazria, Mitzorah, that deal with impurities. And then we come back this week to Achrei Mot. And Achrei Mot literally means after the death. So I thought I shared my screen with you. So let me share my screen with you. And tell me if you can see it. Can you see the screen that says Torah for Today, Achrei Mot?
Can you enlarge a little bit, Rabbi?
It's 18.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. Hold on a second. It's the usual size, but let me do this. Okay, how's that?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, good. So my theme here for today is what gives life meaning? What gives life meaning? And I pose that because the Torah portion begins with the words Achrei Mot, after death. And so I thought, what better way to frame death than life? So I want to just open up, just before we jump into the text itself, and ask you the question, what gives your life meaning? I know, big, broad question, but what would you say gives your life meaning? Stan?
Well, what I do Jewishly certainly is a big aspect of that. The studying, the participation at the congregations that I belong to. But the other frame of that question is that in Israel, for instance, they're one of the happiest countries in the world. They're happy in the fifth place after the Scandinavian countries. And I think what makes them happy is that in Israel, life has a meaning for the citizens. They have that passion and perception that what their life is important.
Okay, good. So I just want to reiterate. So doing Jewish and having purpose are two things that, at least for you, Stan, give your life meaning. Great. Nancy?
Volunteering for me at the temple or otherwise.
Beautiful. Love it. Love it. volunteering, getting involved, making a difference. Steve.
Well, while I do a lot of that, but I also think about my children. I think my children give my life meaning, and helping them and giving them guidance and support would be
Great
my
answer. Good. Now, not everybody is blessed to have children or grandchildren, but if you are, hopefully you embrace that moment and understand the gift of purpose and meaning that that does give you. Great. Linda, I saw your hand flash up first.
Relationships,
So any
Yes.
meaningful, loving relationships.
including children and grandchildren, but friends and otherwise.
Hopefully spouse, the guy sitting next to you over there. Good. Being involved with others, having a sense of community, family, friends, that's really important as well. Anything else? And then we'll jump into the text. Mort.
Yeah, I think my relationship with my family and especially my grandchildren, that's been a blessing in my aging, in my old age. My grandchildren have meant a lot to me.
Good. And it is a gift when we have grandchildren and they're close to us and we're close to them. It can add youth, vigor, excitement, and joy to our lives.
Seriously.
Okay, so let's jump in to Leviticus chapter 18. And it says, K'maseh Eretz Mitzrayim, Asher Yeshavtem Ba, Lo Ta'asu Uk'maseh Eretz Canaan, Asher Ani Mevi'echem, Shema Lo Ta'asu B'chakutechem Lo Telechu. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. So before we jump into the commentary, let's try to understand the verse. Tell me, what does the verse say to you? What does it mean? Why is it there? What is it cautioning? And more importantly, how do we read this verse through the lens of our own lives? Because we're not living in the land of Egypt or the land of Canaan. So how do we make sense of this verse? Those are the two questions. Okay, so I see George and then Bob. Go ahead, George.
Okay. Well, they're very bad places, both of them, but they're different. It's not the same thing. That's why we mentioned both of them instead of together. So there's pitfalls in Egypt, and there's maybe somewhat different pitfalls in Canaan. So we got to be aware of this,
Okay, so what you're saying is, George, if I understand it, is God is saying to the children of Israel, Egypt and Canaan are bad places.
Yeah.
Differently bad places.
There's some similarities, but yeah, it's like, okay, to bring it to today, if you're bringing up kids, they're walking through a minefield. I mean, there's so many bad things different.
Unless they're on those excellent college campuses.
Yes, yeah, I know that's one thing, because so many of us, not anybody here, but Jews, have worshipped these institutes of so-called higher education, and they find out they're really not so great, and they really don't like you. Okay, that's got to be a shock to some people, and again, all the other pitfalls that you could fall into, trying to lead a Jewish life or any kind of decent life, and there's so many ways to go bad. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so if I understand what George is saying is, it may be tempting to see the things that are in our society that are seemingly on the surface possibly good, or even if they're not on the surface good and they're still bad, that may be attractive to us by living in those predominant cultures.
Yeah.
And the Torah is warning us against that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Bob, and then Mort.
So maybe this is just a mirror image of what George just said. I think what this message is that we should find our own selves, that we should follow our own path, develop our mores and nurture them.
When we are living amongst others, what I'm hearing Bob say is it's easy to lose a sense of self. It's easy to lose a sense of personal understanding and meaning. And if we're going to live amongst others, we cannot forget who we are and our own identity, and to not lose that. Bob, is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, but you said it a lot better than I did.
No, no. Not true. I'm just hearing your words. Okay, good. Mort.
Yeah, it seems to me it's also a reminder by God, because they had worshipped the golden calf. And he's again reminding them that they're to take a separate and different path.
Okay, good.
And
Okay,
I
so
think that's why it's important.
So Mort adds an aspect of religious practice in particular. And that is to say that Judaism comes along and says over and over again in the Torah to worship only one God, to not get caught up in the pools of idolatry. And what Mort is saying is this warning is just that. It is going to be compelling to worship the way that the people in the societies in which you are entering worship. Don't do that. Because if you do that, you will lose your sense of morality. You will get lost in your purpose, in your meaning. Okay, great. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Leora.
Also thinking about the fact that as we learned that the Israelite in Egypt worshipped as well as the Egyptians did, and I think the message that I see that it's very clear is that they have to change their ways, and it's very difficult when you are used to doing something. Stop it,
Habits are hard to break.
break.
Practices that we've lived with for long periods of time are hard to change. But right, what this verse is challenging us to do is just that, is to not go back on those practices that we're so familiar with and stay true to who we ultimately want to be. Okay, good. Yeah, Lauren.
But I think Jewish parents living now are faced with, it's very difficult because in the West San Fernando Valley, they made basketball tryouts on the second night of Passover. And a lot of Jewish parents were faced with the dilemma, do they let their children try out on the second night of Passover, or then they were given the option, or they don't get on a team? And even though they complained, they said, well, that's that. So it's, you're constantly faced, when my kids went to Calabasas High School, graduation was on a Friday night, grad night was on a Friday night. We fought to get it off of Friday night. It went on deaf ears. So that's that. So either your child doesn't go to grad night if you're practicing Shabbat, and you're constantly fighting these laws if you're observing them, and it becomes very difficult. So, you're
Okay,
up against.
Lauren is raising a very important factor. And that is that if we want to stay true to who we are, living in a culture that is the majority culture against our minority positions, there are going to have to be sacrifices that are made. if we want to stay true to who we are.
Yeah.
If we don't want to stay true to who we are, then there's really no sacrifices because we're not giving anything up. But if we want to stay true to who we are, then there are sacrifices because we will have to give up certain things,
Yeah.
like playing on the basketball team or going to grad night, saying that while those things are really important, they're not as important as my identity. They're not as important as the covenant. They're not as important as the meaning that I derive from who I am in relationship to my Jewish community and God. And those are hard decisions to make, especially for 8-year-olds, 15-year-olds, and 18-year-olds.
Mhm.
Less hard to make for parents. But too often, I think parents,
Yeah.
right, go with the majority, with the culture, and
Yeah.
not with the tradition. And therefore, it makes it impossible almost for kids to make those decisions on their own. Okay, great. Thank you. So now let's take a look at the text itself and see what Kol Omer Kra does. He notices twice in this verse, it says, Lo ta'asu, meaning you shall not do. And he says, from this we learn 2 obligations. One is with regard to the habits developed in the land of Egypt, where the Israelites dwelt for 210 years, and people just follow their habits. Somebody said that. One of you talked about following bad habits. And one is with regard to the attractiveness and seductiveness of the practices of the land of Canaan. Due to their newness, and the heart is drawn towards that which is new. So you have 2 ideas here. One is there is both a tendency to hold on to things that we shouldn't hold on to, and there is a tendency to jump into new things that look and smell shiny and yet can create complications. And both those things are that which we need to be careful of. What are the habits that we've picked up from past experiences that we want to let go of? And how do we caution ourselves? How do we be careful to make sure that we don't get entrapped by the seductive things that are brand new to us? Can you see those 2 things in your own lives, in your own experiences?
Well, okay.
Yeah, George.
Okay. Well, I think, you know, to lead some kind of a meaningful life in our, you know, we're talking about, you have to get the concept that you're here on a mission. All right. And your mission is to, you know, the idea there's one God and you're supposed to do good things, you know, and worship and all the above. Start with that. Otherwise, you're going to be distracted by every good looking thing, you know, that comes along, many of which are, you know, are extremely bad, but they look good.
Okay.
And
Okay,
that's
good.
been going on through history. This isn't new. I mean,
So,
you know,
so- so George is saying, if we can
yeah,
hold on to our purpose for being,
yeah,
then we will
Yeah.
not lose. We may
yeah, of course, but
find ourselves.
you know what you're here for. You're here for a purpose. Get that into your head, you know.
Okay, so if you remember, that's why I asked the question in the beginning of class, what
Yeah.
gives life meaning?
Yeah,
And I think it was Stan who said that the reason that Israel scores so high on a happiness scale is because they clearly understand their purpose and mission. And in understanding their purpose and mission, it guides their behavior. That's not to say that Israelis don't go astray, but when push comes to shove, they understand their purpose and mission. And that keeps them on the path. Mort.
the problem isn't it a problem that the Jew resides outside of Israel in a secular society where he is a small minority. Unless he's going to isolate himself as the Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn do, how are you going to become a part of the society in which you live in? It's not realistic.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you asked that question. The easiest way to manage what the Torah is suggesting is, as Mort says, build walls. Very, very, very strong and tall walls. And the Orthodox does that pretty well, right? Some of the walls they build are the walls of mitzvot. When you keep kosher, that immediately limits the possibility of interaction with the outside world. When you dress a certain way, that separates you from other people because of your dress. So building walls is one of the ways in which we can maintain our distinct and separate sense of purpose and mission. But Mort is also saying there's a disadvantage to building walls that are so tall that we may not be able to learn from and gain wisdom from the society in which we live. And so there's a tension between walls and non-walls. And navigating that tension is a very complicated thing. And I do think the conservative movement, good or bad, right or wrong, successful or unsuccessful, has attempted to build walls that are not so high that we lose the connection to the outside world, but we're high enough to keep us focused on purpose and mission the way that George is describing. Stan.
Well, one person who I think exemplified being able to live in both worlds was Joe Lieberman. Blessed memory. He did, was certainly Orthodox, participated in the government in so many ways, and yet kept kosher and kept his laws and was an example for so many people. And I think that's one way to look at it, that we need examples.
Yeah, that's a great, I love that. Thank you for bringing him up. He was able to live in the real world, meaning the secular world, and yet while holding on to his principles, his morals, his ethics, which were guided by his Jewish tradition. George?
Yeah, several comments. First of all, in some respects, it's easier now than it was in the 50s, where we tried to become more homogeneous, fit in, like looking like everybody and acting like everybody. Now there's so many different weird, types walking around that, what's another one,
Can I
kinds of costumes.
Can I pause you for 1 second? Because I think your comment is an important one, George, but I do think that it's not only in the 1950s. If you look at today, if you look today at those people who have attached themselves, and I don't want to sound like I'm being political here, but I'm going to just give me a minute.
Okay.
For those Jews that have attached themselves to the strongly progressive groups, and of late recognize that those progressive groups have no place for Jews and Zionists, I think it's the same wake-up call that you're speaking about from the 1950s.
May I make another comment, though? That's only warm up. What I wanted to say was, I grew up in a small town, and and you want to fit in. You want to join the country club or get invited. Pretty soon you start losing Judaism. But Also the fact a lack of knowledge. That's pretty hard to transmit. The knowledge of why you should be Jewish. What does it mean? What's your purpose? Most, hey, you look forward to being involved in the Gentile society, as part of it, not, in it, but separate. So you get less and less Judaism as you move along, and pretty soon, generations forget what, the whole thing. Because they don't know anybody who knows anything or follows anything. And it just kind of drops off.
So that's the wall. In other words, the wall is
Got to be there somewhere. I mean, it's got to be.
Yeah.
But you also have to know why, what you're doing. Otherwise,
And that's why I think in Torah, Moses, through God, repeats over and over and over again the mission of the Jewish people, the covenantal relationship, right? Kedoshim Tihiyu, you need to be a holy people. Ki Kadosh Ani Adonai, because I, the Lord your God, am holy.
Yeah.
Right? That message, as George has said, has disappeared, has gotten lost, is not part of the education of our young people to then be able to make the decisions not to join the homogeneous crowd.
Even if they show up for some watered down Hebrew school, which is unfortunately fewer and fewer,
It's true.
I mean, they may be able, at least in my day, what was considered, good was to mouth the words of bar mitzvah, not understanding anything, but you could pronounce the words,
You all agree with George that there is a sense of, in this generation and younger generation, a loss of meaning, a loss of purpose, a loss of vision, and therefore a far easier way to get entrapped by, secular society because of that?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
No? Yeah, Rob?
I don't think so. I'm old enough to remember what it was like going to Hebrew school, growing up in the 50s and 60s. I think the same pressures were there at that time.
Going out to play baseball as opposed to having to go to religious school.
I had no.
Mort, go ahead.
I grew up in Brooklyn. A Jewish neighborhood. There were the Jewish neighborhoods, the Italian neighborhoods, and I went and got bar mitzvah, but afterwards I never attended a synagogue. My parents weren't members of any synagogue. I remember on Rosh Hashanah having visited, gone to synagogue to see my grandfather who was there. It wasn't until I moved to Los Angeles where I wasn't in a Jewish community any longer, but a much larger secular community that I reached out to become a member of the synagogue. I first moved to Burbank and was confronted with terrible anti-Semitism while I was in Burbank. Terrible experience my wife had there in anti-Semitism. So it wasn't until I was placed in an environment where everybody wasn't Jewish that I wanted to find to be among some Jews.
Interesting. Thank you. Nancy.
I think the younger the kids are, the more less likely they are to adhere to like the Jewish tradition, because you're thrown into a public grammar school and probably not a bunch of Jewish kids. But the older you get, the more you start to learn or go to Sunday school like I did, and you get to you understand more of I don't know, taking on the Jewish tradition and stuff. I don't think young kids really care in this day and age when you're little, going to grammar school and stuff. It doesn't have meaning till you get older.
Okay. Steve, and then Bob, and then Stan.
I wanted to echo Mort. I've had similar life experiences. Grew up in New York, Jewish Irish neighborhood, and the synagogue was across the street. So there was a sense of community, being part of the Jewish community. But after my bar mitzvah, I was similar to Mort. I kind of got separated, moved away, and moving to LA about 20 years ago, joining Valley Beth Shalom and now HAMAKOM it appears very important to me. And I look at that in the context of what's happening in the world. Two major things that affect every culture is science and and things like the internet. The internet is dramatically changing how we can communicate. For example, my wife, who was born in Paris, France, immigrated here 40 years ago. She has family in Paris. She has family who moved from Paris to Israel. So I hear international conversations in news constantly, every day in French. And so the world is dramatically changing, and we need to reflect how do we operate in that changing world. I'm very worried when with what's going on college campuses, and I'm sure all of us are. You just have to watch the news. It's very, very scary. I'm hoping that this subsides, gets quiet, but our exposure as Jews and everyone in the world to a worldwide noise and communication is something we need to think about and focus on to maintain our Jewish culture in that context.
Great, thank you. I think it was Bob. Were you next?
Well, I'll talk next. I just want to put a slightly different tone on this discussion. Years ago, Alan Tolkoff and I published a monthly newsletter, if you will, whose general theme was asking the question, why be Jewish? And we would ask our readers to write essays and give us their reasons, what was meaningful to them from a Jewish perspective. And our audience was geared toward post-high school people, but it also included adults. And I was expecting to get essays like, I'm Jewish because my mom made me Jewish and it doesn't mean anything to me. Our responses were entirely different. They were insightful. They were discernible reasons why these young people continue to be Jewish. And so it makes me wonder if maybe we're just not asking them to be Jewish in the right Jewish ways.
Interesting. In other words, like in Stephen Mort's example, the kernel of Judaism was always there, even if it didn't get ignited after bar mitzvah. But the fact that at some point it did get ignited is proof positive that if you can do it right in the beginning, then there's something to fall back on when you need that identity.
Yeah.
Stan.
Well, I think that it's more difficult for children, young people in today's world than when we grew up, because the whole culture has the values of the culture of the, let's say, post-World War II America were much closer to Jewish values than the values that we have in today's world. That's one thing. And the second thing is what was mentioned with the internet and social media and whatever, that those are difficult things for young people to deal with, to live in this world and to maintain the Jewish kinds of things that we're talking about. So I think it's more difficult in those ways for young people today. And you know, I wonder what's going to happen.
Okay. Let's move. Let me share my screen again. Hold on a second. Okay. So, what I was interested in, we've discussed it, is these questions. What in our current society counts as those seductive things we should avoid? What in our society counts as those things we should embrace? What gives your life meaning? We've talked around those questions, so I think, we can move on. Unless there's something in there that jumps out at you that you want to mention before we move on to the next verse. Okay, so we were looking at verse 3 of chapter 18. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt or the land of Canaan. 2 verses later, it says, Ushmartem et chukotai ve'et mishpatai asher yaseh otam hadam v'chai bahem ani Adonai. So these are the things you shouldn't do. And now it says these are the things you should do. You shall keep my laws and my rules. And when you pursue them, chai, you shall live. I am God. So the question is, what is the emphasis here? Notice it says, if you do these things, you will live. It doesn't say you will be good. It doesn't say I will appreciate you. It says you will live. So the question is, what is the connection between doing these things and living? And what does the Torah mean when it says you shall live? Does it mean if you don't do them, you will physically die? Is that what the Torah is saying? What really do you think is going on here in this verse, George?
Yeah, a whole bunch of things. Let me give you a whole list here. Hukotai. Okay. What's that the third word in? My laws. Well, those are laws that make no sense to us. That we cannot rationalize, like a mikveh or kosher, things like that. So, and mishpatim are laws essentially man and man. You're not supposed to murder or steal. We can understand that under any system, the second part. You got to have laws so society will function. The first part, we can't use logic to figure this out. Why you should not mix wool and linen or, whatever, or this thing with the bird and, all kinds of things. So, okay, so we're mentioning both. And the word shamar, that usually means the negative. Don't do a negative. Usually the law is sot often to do something positive. So, maybe this is don't do these negative things. I'm not sure how that works. But when you say v'chai, you shall live, that's singular. It's not like the people look, that means like you as an individual. Well, okay. I can understand that Jewish people won't live, if they don't follow these guidelines or some kind of guidelines to make them distinct, and to carry out a mission. Otherwise, just become assimilated and disappear. But why they use a singular, you tell me. I mean,
Well, I'm not going to tell you because I asked a different question.
okay.
The question that I asked was, the question that I asked is, what do you think it means when it says, and you shall live by them? What is the nature of the living? Does it mean you don't observe them?
Yeah, to follow them. No, well, no. No, it means to be alive. Hi. It doesn't mean very distinct. Okay.
Wait, I'm not sure I followed that last comment.
No, I'm not either, because
Okay. So let's
jump to be
around.
alive, and yet, we use the word live to physically be alive. You will physically be alive if you eat pork, I mean, okay.
Okay, so we're not talking about physical life and death.
Okay,
No.
okay.
Rob and then Bob.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think if you just take that sentence, by virtue of which man shall live, and add the words with meaning, which is
Yeah.
just what we're talking about, then it all makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So it connects to our previous conversation that we have. It's not just about living, it's about
Yeah.
living with purpose,
Yeah.
living in a meaningful way. By ignoring the mitzvot
Mhm.
and by fully jumping into the culture around us, we will live,
Yeah.
but we won't live in a way that reflects purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
By holding on to the mitzvot, that elevates the type of living that we're doing. Good. I like that. Bob.
Well, I was going to ask if we could look at the Hebrew word that's being translated into the English word live
Mhm.
and ask
Hi.
if there's a deeper meaning in the Hebrew than what we get in English. When
Okay.
we say live, our brain in English naturally thinks of corporeal living, or heart beating or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
We think in terms of opposites. So you either
Well,
live or you die.
when
But
you
in Hebrew,
say,
nuance.
good. So let me ask you, when you say the word l'chaim,
Mhm.
right, which is the word chai, l'chaim,
Mhm.
what do you mean when you say that? What is the subtext?
I mean a lot more than living or breathing. It's lead as Rob said, it's leading a meaningful life. You will live an enhanced life.
Good. It goes back to all the things when I asked you all in the very beginning, what gives your life meaning? You can apply those answers that you gave to the word l'chaim, right?
Mhm.
To say l'chaim is to derive meaning from relationships, from family, right? From volunteerism, from doing good in the world, right? Those are the things that we say l'chaim to. That's what it means to be alive. It doesn't mean just to breathe each day and get through every day, right? It means to live with purpose, to live with meaning. That's it. And that's what Leviticus is saying, right? It's easy to get caught up in the world around us, but don't forget the mitzvot are there to remind you what real living is all about. Yeah, Lauren.
It's those moments that you can't describe, those moments that just fill your heart, that you can't describe them. So, we had a Seder at our house and we had little children. I think the oldest was maybe 8. And they were able to read the 4 questions in Hebrew. And then they were able to, and even my little 3-year-old was able to sing the song about the Pharaoh. And it's just that those moments that you can't describe, that you just know that you teach the children, like it says, you're teaching the next generation about what's important. And you asked about, is it meaningful for the children? I think it was meaningful. Not only were they able to read in the Hebrew, but they were able to read in the English as well. And it was, and Mark and I said afterwards, it was just this undescribable moment that just feel, because it was a time that we sat during COVID. It was just the 2 of us at the table. It's just fills up your heart, and that the next generation hopefully is going to take those memories with them. And that's what I think is, I don't honor all the mitzvot, but I try to do as many as I can that just fills up my heart. It's lighting the candles with whether we're in person or on the phone, or whatever I can do. And it's those undescribable times that I can't explain it. It's just those aha moments.
I think you did explain. Chai, to live, means to know that what you're doing has meaning beyond your enjoyment.
Right.
Right? When there is meaning that is attached to others, right? When you do a Seder and you see the impact, right, that your education and your gifts have on the next generation, that's what creates That's what makes you fully alive,
Right.
right? If it just rests with us, that's it.
And we
Good.
only use two pieces of matzah like you suggested. And all they wanted to do is find the when's it time to find the afikoman? And when's it time to find the afikoman? But it was,
The idea.
you could only do as much as you could do with little ones without frightening them to death. But yes, that's
Lior.
it. That's it.
Just to say a word about what Lauren just said, it's from generation to generation. And Mike and I felt the same way, that our grandson was able to tell us the story of the whole thing, and I felt like we succeeded to move on the torch. That's regarding the Seder. The Torah is called the Torah Chaim, words to live by, wisdom to live by. And when we talking about the shamartem et chokotai, that's, in general, you should do that. But then moves us to an individual that we are, each one of us, supposed to do it by ourselves. And that ties me to the first sentence that I don't quite remember what it was, but the first sentence you started with. Thank you. It's the same thing. It's, you have to learn and take the Torah, words of the Torah, in order to be able to live your way in the right way of God's guidance.
Beautiful, beautiful. Stan.
Well, I think the blessing that we say when we start the class, but the Torah means also more than study in the academic sense. It means apply, like we're trying to apply these words and understand how they. So the word what said is right. It's more than words. It's the words of Torah, and in a way to integrate them into our life.
It's interesting, Stan, that you raised that, because the word la'asok b'divrei Torah doesn't mean, it could have used a lot of words. It could have said, lishmor, could have said la'asot, could have said, but it says la'asok. And la'asok literally means to be engaged with, be busy with.
Yeah.
And in modern Hebrew, esek is your profession. So in a sense, that blessing is saying to us that on some level, if we don't make Torah our profession, if we don't busy ourselves with Torah in some deep and meaningful way, we lose our sense of purpose and mission. And then we're led astray. It's nice. For the last few minutes of class, we're going to change direction based upon Degel Machane Ephraim's commentary, which is an interesting commentary. He looks at this verse and he plays with the word otam right here. This word right there. It says, you shall keep my laws and my rules. Asher aseh ya'aseh otam. You shall do them. Otam means them. And then a person shall live. But he purposely misreads that word. He says, when scripture records the work of which of them, otam, the word is written as if it said atem. Because you notice the little dot above the aleph is the O. And it could have been written long with a vav, but it's not. It's written with a dot. And as we know when we read Torah, the dots aren't in the Torah. So we could read that word as atem or otam. Are you following me?
No.
Does everybody get that?
Yeah.
And if it was to be read as atem and not otam, atem, he's saying, it has the same letters as the word emet, truth. And then he says, those who make the truth the foundation of their life, who acknowledge the truth and speak the truth in their heart, walking in the ways of truth, they shall live by them. This is the meaning of attaining a long life. So now he had something profound. Go back to the beginning. It says, do not copy the practices of the land of Egypt or the land of Canaan. Don't practice their laws. Then it says, you shall keep my laws and my rules. And if you do that, you are living a life of truth. So he's inviting us to think, what really is true in our lives? The things that we do, not only what gives us meaning, but what's true, what's real, what's authentic. And I think the example that Lauren gave a few minutes ago about a Pesach Seder with children getting up and being able to sing the words of their heritage, that's emet, that's truth. They're going to learn a lot of nursery rhymes. They're going to learn a lot of words to pop music. They're going to learn to be able to mimic movies and TV shows that they see over and over and over again. Will they be able to speak the language of the Jewish people? Saying Manish Tana is an example of that. Right? That is speaking our truth. Right? Our truth is, right, what gives us meaning. What in society is not true? What in society leads us to falsification? And what in society keeps us honest, keeps us with integrity, holds us to our moral standards? Right? That, I think, is the essence of what Torah is saying. So for you, what's your truth? What is your truth? Particularly as it may relate to all things Jewish. Right? Because I think this goes back to the question that Stan and Mort and George were saying earlier, which is, have we lost the why of Judaism? So what's your truth, Lauren?
So my truth is I was raised during the time when girls were not given a Jewish education. You know, it was the 60s, and I would stand at my bedroom window and watch the boys play in the Hebrew schoolyard and run in to get a Hebrew education and wanted one so badly, but they weren't called to the Torah. It was important for me that my children have a Hebrew education. Whether or not they took it for granted or not, I don't know. They both went to Israel before I did. And now my son is passing that along to his children. And he joined a Havarah, and all the people in the Havarah said they were there because it was important for their parents to carry on the tradition for their children. So my truth is, I didn't get it. I gave it to my children. And at least one of my children who is married and has children is passing it along to his children. So, you know, it's being fulfilled to next generation. I mean, it's important that my grandchildren have the opportunity to go to Jewish preschool. My grandson is going to Hebrew school. He loves Hebrew school. And my granddaughter will do it too. But you know, they have the opportunity to have that. Hopefully.
Might I say, Lauren, that I think there's more than you just said about yourself that's your truth. Because you weren't given the opportunity when you were younger, you have made it your mission, as long as I've known you over these last decade, to get the education that you
Yeah.
didn't get when you were a little girl.
Right.
And that is also your truth. Your truth is
truth is I
not
love
only
it. I
not
love it.
only that you didn't get it, but you didn't get it, and therefore you wanted it for your kids and your grandchildren, and as an adult
And as
for
a dog.
yourself. That's a
You are correct.
powerful,
You are correct.
powerful truth.
Yes.
George, what's
Yeah,
your
I reject this whole concept here, your truth. I mean, you'll have anarchy if each of us decides, what's right, what's wrong, whatever. In other words,
well, except George, it's written in the singular. Adam v'chai bahem. It is your truth. It doesn't mean your truth is ignoring the wisdom of our tradition. Hopefully it is in
For
staying
me,
connected.
well, if I'm deciding, I decided, why not eat shrimp,
Because
whatever.
then you're not observing the first.
Well, that would be, quote, somebody might say, well, that's my truth. I don't see any, whatever. In other words, there's a path. All right, there's flexibility somewhat, but, there's a path to fulfill this mission, and we're supposed to be on this mission. And some of us, we get the concept, different ways, perhaps. We get the message. Maybe we had this, what they say, a pintel yid, in the Yiddish. It's in there somewhere, and we start to bring it out. But we're not deciding, coming up with. I mean, it's supposed to be there. We're supposed to follow this path.
Okay, so let me.
I mean, okay, we're not 100%. I acknowledge. Okay.
Okay, so again, but when I asked the question, I framed it in the context of the last 59 minutes of our discussion.
Right.
I didn't frame it as in an open-ended question of, hey, people, what's your truth? I framed it in within the lens of staying true to the purpose and mission of being.
When did you get the message and how are you trying to carry it out? I mean, okay.
Mort, last comment before we end class today.
I think my truth is that I have great respect for Judaism's ethics and morality and the way one should conduct their life and interact with other individuals and their society, and that's my truth for Judaism, and I'm that's the way I think of myself as a Jew.
Beautiful. I would imagine, Mort and Lauren, that many people share both of the comments that you made, and I think they're great comments to end with. So, as always, love being with all of you. Thank you for your wisdom, and I will see you next week or the week after as we
Peace be
continue
with
our
you.
Torah for today.
Good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
May it be a peaceful week.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Go ahead, Mort. Yeah.
I just want to say, besides, I'm very concerned that the Jewish community and the Jewish leadership has lost the PR battle, and I think the Jewish leadership has to ask themselves why and be more active and not to be afraid to be political, because by not being political, we're really suffering, and the leadership should not be afraid to be out there, and the conservative movement is just too passive.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Thank
All
you,
right.
guys.
All right, everybody. A good week
Shabbat
ahead.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom. And hopefully I will see you all soon.